We are on an epic pre-launch day of September 7th, 2014.
Gorgeous outside.
Gorgeous outside. I'm with Hifzija Bajramovic.
Good.
Thank you. And Paul LeMay. Also good.
Also good. And now he's good, but sometimes good.
All right, say your name for me.
Hifzija Bajramovic.
And say your name for me.
Paul LeMay.
we don't know our identities anymore.
No.
That's what happens.
Yeah, it's been 9 years of entanglement.
Yeah.
And now that things are confused, just like conservatives and liberals, they think they're different, but they're actually the same. They're so mashed up.
It's kind of hard to imagine that you might have emerged intact, but maybe you've emerged intact as one another.
Yeah, what is in unity to be intact? I mean, we are so open that there is no tactness or intactness. I mean, everything is so open. And part of working on the book actually was that to break boundaries of all kinds. And we did boundaries between the two of us too, so it really worked. It was labor, though. Took lots of fights and caring and eventually love.
Caring and swearing.
Caring and swearing. And speaking of intact, you had to use tact with each other, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Yeah, you had to use procedure, which is kind of boring way of going about things. Creative way is kind of messing everything up and then see what comes out. And we did a lot of that. It's good in messing me up,
Yeah.
What would you say about that, Paul?
It's nice to listen to this conversation and then wonder if I can say anything meaningful. What he's saying is interesting because, when you first start working with somebody, there's a lot of this kind of artificial politeness layer. It's really hard to describe. People know what it means. Like if you go to the office and your boss asks your opinion, it tends to be a little deferential. You don't get on top of the desk and start cackling like a rooster, and people would carry you out in a stretcher. But as you get to know somebody, it's kind of like, as people say they go away on a wilderness vacation, you live with them for enough days, the artificiality breaks down. And then you get to see the real person. And a lot of people don't handle that transition very well. They usually come away from a vacation feeling like, I'm not going back out that anymore with that person to that kind of, context. But, there's something really helpful and deeply insightful that can come out of that process if it's given enough time, especially when I've been a writer on my own for many years. And so the creative process tends to be something that I engage in a solitary fashion. So suddenly when I found myself in a situation of co-writing, that whole model had to change. And so that in and of itself was a process of discovery, and then finding out that it is possible to co-create with people and that, you can feed off of one another's energy, and then it becomes like play. And then the thing that comes out, and I'll use one quick example. There was this famous story between John Lennon and Paul McCartney. And what a lot of people don't know is that the two of them didn't often get along. And there were lots of fights, and both of them are really alpha males in many ways as artists. So they had different styles. People will debate on what their styles were, but there's certainly John Lennon often came across as being more edgy, and Paul McCartney coming across as more of a softie, love song type person. There's descriptions that each of their personalities was actually the opposite, was the reverse of that. My point is that when they produced something, it was something rare because they took two things that couldn't be bottled together and they bottled them together. And that's what brought about the uniqueness of their music as the Beatles, right? Most of the songs were written by those two. And when they parted and went on to individual careers, you can't really compare the dynamism of the music of Paul McCartney alone and John Lennon alone as being Beatle-ish, if you know what I mean. So that, to me, and I've used that example several times when we were actually writing. I said, you see the world in a certain way, and I see the world in a certain way, but when you merge them, you get a third synergistic product that neither person alone could ever create. And hopefully because of that, it'll be something that will be resonating with a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that the working of creativity has to do with breaking boundaries. And if you have two different people, personalities, and we're all trained to have our own individuality and defend it, and sometimes to blood being spilled. But in order to create, you have to have boundaries that have to be broken. So Paul and myself, I think we're pretty strong individuals, right? So it took some time to kind of remove those boundaries, to get rid of the roles. And once when you get rid of the roles, then the real enmeshment of energy, of ideas, of possibilities come out, and all kinds of ideas have come out from this particular interaction. And the book talks about that. The book talks about how people get stuck in the roles which they feel safe in, which they cherish, and they think this is who they are, not realizing that underneath all of it there is that entity or soul or whatever word you want to use, really that is so much alive, that wants to live, that wants to create, that wants to be and exist. And then the role tends to subdue that and make it directional in space and time, one directional, while the soul wants to be all over the place, multivalent as we talk about it. And that was enriching for Paul and me, because we needed to let the roles go, right? And it took some time to do that, for us to both give up the power game or give up the vulnerability game. You know, once when you come out open, let your identity go, then you come out naked, and then you get vulnerable, and that lots of people see it as weakness. Our vulnerability was the power, because it produced so much together. That's where real exchange of energy can happen. That's where real ideas come out, and execution of those ideas. Yeah, for me, ideas come very easily, creativity, but execution of those ideas I'm not as good at, and that's where Paul really comes in, is really good in putting all those things in material form, in palatable form, so that people can actually understand and hear. So without Paul, I'd be kind of voice to deaf ears. With Paul, I have lots of ears that can hear. Yeah.
As I mentioned, we're at sort of a peak point here of 9 years of collaboration between the two of you, and later this week you're going to have your first sample copy in your hands to look at. So this moment is never going to return. That's why I think it's an exciting point to have a little conversation, and we can talk more later. But having just had a glimpse of the table of contents and the cover, and from what you're saying, it seems to me that the contents of the book are almost still alive. Like, my impression is that the reader, as one of your readers in the near future, that I will be kind of reading as well as witnessing a process that happened, imagining that it was a combination of your two energies, I think makes it quite unique and fascinating just in that.
I think all that worked very nicely for us.
That's right. And, you know, when you take a glance through that table of contents, there are so many words and terms in there that I have never even thought of or imagined. And that in itself is a little mind-boggling and intriguing. I mean, it draws me right in. I want to just dive in that book and...
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. That's nice to hear. Yeah, so the full title is Primal Mind, Primal Games, Why We Do What We Do.
Is that an intriguing title?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Primal Games, Primal Process that's talking through us anyway. So it's not us, it's Primal Process talking to people. So it's up to them to listen.
You know, maybe a bit from each of you of, after all of this work and collaboration, what do you envision the benefit to the reader who receives a copy of your book?
Yeah, I would like the reader to have some sense of what the reader is all about. And the book, hopefully, is going to give some ideas how to let go, how to trust the vulnerability, how to trust that subliminal stuff in us that keeps on talking to us, which we tend to shut down with logic and expectations and a course of life which is predetermined by linear time, chrono time, and get into just state of being.
It's interesting, in the early stages of writing the book, you come at it with this particular idea that you may be able to write, as with a lot of nonfiction projects, you could write an outline around what you're going to sort of say. I know one particular day I was driving back from Whistler out on the west coast and on the Sea to Sky Highway, and was listening to CBC radio, and Eleanor Wattell was interviewing 3 writers. I think all 3 were poets, and you don't often hear from poets. And one of the things that one of the poets said really struck me, and it relates to what we're doing or have done. It's that when you engage in writing, you go in with a particular idea thinking that's what you're going to write about. But while you're writing about it, you discover something new, something you didn't anticipate through the act of writing. And that something new is born that enriches you, the writer, as much as it enriches the audience or your readership. And that really spoke to me deeply, because it shows that the experience of discovery is one of those things that really enlivens material in a way that allow people to connect to it. So that's what you were asking in the earlier part. How did you come about to make this material relevant or something that people could connect to? So if we as writers go through that experience and we connect with it, whether it's through our fascination with the question, exploring and not knowing where the hell it's going to end up, and finding it to our surprise some really amazing answers, really, then we've brought the reader along on an adventure, and that they are co-discovering with us, you know? It's as though we're in the front end of the cavern, and we're just sort of saying, hey guys, you got to see this. It's kind of like a Hardy Boys adventure. And they all get excited too. And the other thing is that, as I said, writing the book in a kind of sequential or point form way didn't really work for us. It had to have this organic trajectory where I was thinking about it while Hifzija was saying certain things, and I was trying to coin a phrase. I don't know if I coined it properly, but it was kind of like adventure hopscotch, where you are jumping from one square to another. You're not necessarily jumping 1, 2, 3. You might jump 1, 3, 5, 6, 9, or 10, and then back again. So what happens is that our book is basically a multidisciplinary look at this process. So we don't just dwell on one perspective or one way of looking at a given topic. We kind of give a smorgasbord, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And that's kind of a unique way of approaching any given topic. And hopefully, if somebody reads this book and they're not really into one given area, like perhaps brain science, it's only going to last you a chapter or 2, and then you're done, and you go on to another topic, and it may speak to you. And I saw that in one of our proofreaders. She found the second part of the book spoke to her more directly than the first part, which is great, because then you reach a larger and wider audience.
Well, thanks both of you for that. Hifzija, would you give us a bit of a sense of your background?
Persia, 400 years ago, family moved to the now former Yugoslavia, and then stationed for some time. So I come from Yugoslavia, basically, where I was born. Immigrated to Canada in '68 because I wanted to, not because I had to, like most of my compatriots who had to leave Bosnia because of the war and all kinds of atrocities, which was impetus for us really to understand in the book what was really going on. And I think we gave some decent understanding and possibly solutions, particularly in terms of societal Armageddon, which I think is what happened in Bosnia and all those countries that come to that fighting. So I came to Canada in '68 after finishing my university, qualified myself as a psychiatrist, and worked in Toronto, came to Ottawa, was teaching, and now I'm kind of retired right now. I'm too busy with this book, and I think my whole life was a life of curiosity and discovery. Middle child among 7. I was left to my own devices, so no one had to tell me what to do, and I could experiment all kinds of things, and I did experiment all kinds of things. So my approach is always experience and think. Experience and think. And then I realized how many things that you experience really make sense as experience, but it's so hard to put it in terms of words. And that's where tough part is. But eventually everything makes sense. That gave me my own independent thinking experiences, so in a way.
And Paul, you mentioned about your background as a writer. Is there anything else you want to say about what you bring into your life, into this world?
When people use that term writer, it sounds, or even author is worse, it's pretentious, right?
Right.
It's like, come on, get real. What do you really do? Certainly I never set out in my life to become a writer. I know that much. I did get involved in psychology in university because of all the topics that I studied. It was certainly one of the most fascinating topics, the human mind. It was an endless exploration. The great intersection between philosophy and science as well. I have to admit, I really do love science, love physics, and I love philosophy, and I've taken all three topics, allowing the subject to draw you in and to explore on your own. But I found the academic system really cumbersome. The university is a mechanism that helps people do that in a structured way, but that doesn't mean it has the monopoly on the learning experience. And now with hindsight of 20, 30 years, looking back, I can see why that happens, and that I wasn't wrong necessarily for myself in not buying into that system that they had set up. It made me freer to inquire in ways that I would prefer. After I finished university, I went into sport administration, very practical trade-like occupation, since I had a great love of sport. But then it morphed, and that's where the writing became more prevalent, through marketing, ironically. First, it's a marketing-related writing, promoting of sport, and then it became writing on topics that I was interested in, which moved into science writing, and having published lots of things mostly on politics. That became the groundwork out of which that my involvement in this project with Hifzija emerged. It was just kind of like a fluke, really. The skill set I brought was a blending of psychology, enough to know as a generalist some of the main themes that are important to understanding the human mind, and then the writing experience itself, right? So that's a skill set. Hifzija being born in Yugoslavia, English not being his first language, he needed a person who could translate some of that into idioms that would be accessible to the most of the folks here in the West. So that's how I saw my role in this process.
And how did you guys meet and conceive of this project in the first place?
And you can look at it in a number of ways, but if you're actually speaking about the project, which came into being in August of 2005, we have a mutual friend by the name of Mio Petrovic, who plays wonderful gypsy music, and with whom we used to go and walk dogs. Hifzija and he had dogs, and we'd walk them in a quarry in the west end of Ottawa called Bruce Pitt. And the dogs occasioned the development of what we called the Bruce Pitt School of Philosophy, which was these long walks over the whole course of the year, cold winter, warm summer, on any topic under the sun. That was really the workshop where all of these major concepts started to get hammered out. And then one day, Mio saying to Hifzija, you got to write a book. And Hifzija, yeah, well, who am I going to get to write a book with? And then he recommended me. So it's kind of that organic process all over again. It's just that you come to know people. It's not a career, it's not like going on a course to learn how to get a job. It's like following your bliss, as Joseph Campbell said, following your passions. And then when the right people are needed, you find them because you've been engaged in that kind of wholesome process all along. And so things can work. But Mio actually said, Hifzija, something to the effect that, I don't know what it is about you two guys, but you gotta come together and write that book.
Yes, he was really adamant because he liked our discussions, and Bruce Pitt, so many ideas, often beyond what science was talking about, were come out more in a theoretical and a playful way. And it made sense to him, particularly this concept of what initially was called the victimization process, which later on turned to be primal process, much deeper course and in the beginning of universe. So he was fascinated by that, and he thought people need to hear it, people need to see it and use it. And me, I like creativity, and I stay with creativity. Execution of that creativity is really not that important to me. And Mio he's an engineer, and he really wants to execute stuff. So he saw the two of us blending together nicely. I mean, the way Paul expresses itself is very succinct, clear communicator with huge amount of knowledge and huge capacity to research stuff. So Paul's contribution to the book was amazing. The research is just unbelievable. How many stones he turned up to find out stuff that he would throw at me, and I had to make sense of them. Yeah, so, and it worked. It worked very nicely. That's really very creative process. So, I mean, we liked each other as people. That was very important. I mean, there is something about connecting that happens on level beyond words. So I think that all that worked very nicely for us. I mean, the creative part is interesting for me. The achievement, I don't really...
Yeah.
That doesn't do much for me. But I think Paul really likes this book to have in his hand and cherish it and put it under his pillow and meditate on it and
just think of that.
And have more insight.
When you lose a tooth when you're a kid, the tooth fairy comes. Just imagine if you put a book under your pillow.
Yeah.
Yeah, then what do you get?
What do you get from that?
What's your prize? Well, actually, this is worth talking about because this is a huge project to be zooming into the finish line, right?
Yeah.
And what happens after, besides the promotion and selling and distribution of the book, but what happens after in your life? What next? And is that something you can even think of so far? Maybe you need to wait to really get a sense of what's next, because you're still in the birthing process here.
Yeah, well, I like to answer that one for me. I think this book came from life because we have been in life. So this book being materialized, we still have our life that's going to be.
Yeah, that's an interesting answer. Yes, it's about life, right? It's, there are a lot of books out there right now from a lot of popular authors, Deepak Chopra and Eckhart Tolle and the like, and they all have something to say and offer. We all know that there's a kind of a new age bandwagon thing going on right now, and I think what I personally brought to the process for myself was that I wanted to have something that had more groundedness in actual science. Deepak tries to do that where possible, certainly, but even at that, he gets lambasted by the purists. And I wanted to write something that was far more based in what we know in the sciences, and so that people will have a greater level of confidence in that, in what was being said. It's not just 57 flavors ice cream, this month's flavor. I wanted to see something that has lasting value, and I put a lot of energy to make that happen. So when you say what's the next step, it's almost like at this point it's not something you can actually control. You're going to see how the universe lets it unfold, and if it comes out of a wholesome process, hopefully the outcomes will be of wholesome consequence as well. And trust in that, because really you have to talk about, as a writer, talk from the place of authenticity. If you can come from that place, then anything that you do is come from a place of wholesomeness, and so that's all you can do in your life, right? It's you put your best foot forward, you try to see if you can understand something as well as you can. And the beauty of having a co-author is you have an immediate sounding board, right? A critical voice sometimes. And so if you say something, you don't necessarily get applause, right? You sometimes get an opposite effect. So it makes you think twice about what you say. Whereas if you're a writer, that you're a solo act, you don't have a lot of self-critical voices going on off in your head, and you might just get on your own little ego bandwagon and start trumpeting the greatest truth that ever been discovered. And this has got more of a humbling process. So that, I think, is an asset of the book, one of its hidden assets, that that it's been read, and as it's being written, it's been read over and thought about dozens of times. That's why it takes 9 years.
Well, speaking of reading over and over, definitely John Heney is one to mention in this process. I think he's been quite involved with that reading process of your book.
He was our editor.
John is our contributing editor.
Sandy was an occasional visitor to the Bruce Pitt School of Philosophy, so he was kind of in the orbit. And he's a capable thinker in his own right. An intelligent guy to look at our material, but even if he doesn't know a lot about psychology, that's an advantage. Because if we're communicating to a bunch of people who don't know much about psychology, he's likely a good test subject. If it doesn't work for him, it's not going to work for a lot of people. So yeah, he's again one of the other vetting processes through which the material has to run its gauntlet. And he came in with a lot of great ideas, great chapter transitions, titles for some of the chapters. And that may sound like a small thing, but that isn't a small thing. To take a body of work in a whole chapter, which might be 20, 30 pages, and then to summarize it in a really nice, catchy line, that's a real talent. It's really a true talent.
Well, I think we've covered a lot here, you guys. Any final thoughts to peg on it?
I'm in awe of people, always have been and always will be. And the book comes from there, from me just being in awe of people.
From people, to people, for people.
Right.
it.
Yeah. Yes.
All right, well, thanks, you guys.
Thank you, Lynn.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity, Lynn.
You're welcome.